Welcome to the Teachers Talkin podcast, hosted by Dustin and Ghazali Abdul Wahab. In this podcast, we discuss all things education and teaching, from innovative teaching methods to challenges to strategies and much, much more. In this discussion or roundtable-based podcast, we bring in educators from all around the world to talk about a variety of education topics so that we can support as many teachers as possible. We want this to be a place of inspiration, personal and professional development, and simply a place where we can elevate education together. Welcome to Teachers Talkin. Hey everybody, welcome to the season finale, the season 2 finale of Teachers Talkin. I'm Dustin and I am here with my co-host Ghazali, and like I said, we are wrapping up season 2 with a conversation today that's a little bit different, but very, very close to home. So this season we have spent in conversation with brilliant educators from all over the world. And today it's going to be just the two of us reflecting on what it actually means to be podcasting educators and how this particular medium can serve both teachers and students in powerful ways. So our episode focus, or our title this time around, is called Why We Hit Record, Podcasting, Pedagogy, and the Power of Voice. And we're going to really be, right? And we're going to be exploring a couple of things here. We're going to talk about why we started this podcast and what it's meant to us. We're going to talk about how educators can use podcasting as a tool for project-based learning. And we're going to talk about how podcasts can be powerful texts in today's classrooms. So, Ghazali, I think it is time to get into it.
Yeah.
So why don't you jump in and start by telling our listeners how you and I met, what made us want to start Teachers Talkin, and, what this journey has started to teach you and, us so far.
Wow. I mean, that's such a big topic. But, Dustin, it feels surreal to me right now that we are already at the end of season 2. Wow. It just felt like we started season 1 like last week. No, but it's the end of season 2 already. And looking back at everything that we've built, and all the episodes that we have recorded, I think it's simply amazing that we've met with so many people. I've lost count how many people we've met already. And when I think about how we met, it takes me back to that time when I opened up my LinkedIn post. Then suddenly I saw your message, and I think we started chit-chatting through LinkedIn DMs, and suddenly just the idea just popped up. Hey, I could click with this guy. He understands me, and I understand where he comes from, and we are two educators. But he comes from the other side of the world. Dustin is in America, and I'm coming from Singapore. So we have two different systems, two different worlds, but we're doing the same job, the same, in education. So maybe we could share and find out, what the differences are between these two systems, and maybe cull from that the best parts of each, and then share it to the world. And that's what we've done. Right, Dustin?
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy because I think back to just before we kind of met, and I was just getting into using LinkedIn as a platform, for me to get my voice out there as an educator, starting something new for myself, leaving the traditional classroom, shifting into coaching teachers and wanting to share more educational content to reach more teachers, and finding you on LinkedIn and just finding your content so relevant to what I was doing, and just really wanting to start connecting with educators all over. And so it was really funny because, you and I originally started just interacting with each other's posts, but then DMing every once in a while, like asking additional questions or just like complimenting one another on the post, or how did you do that? how did that work for you? And just like we just kind of developed a natural friendship from halfway around the world. And I just remember you messaging me one day and saying, hey, we've been chatting and I was wondering, do you want to start a podcast together? And I was like, yes, I've been thinking about wanting to start a podcast. Like, let's do that. And then here we are, like 2 seasons later. Our first episode happened in November of 2023. And now here we are in June of 2025 on our 35th episode, having talked to all sorts of people from all sorts of parts of the world. And it's just been so awesome.
Yeah, I think what made me, or rather, what made us want to start this podcast was also realizing that educators everywhere are having the same conversations about school, in planning meetings, in their group chats, but we're often isolated in our own roles, thinking we're the only ones struggling with how to bridge the gap between policy and practice. And then now you have here, for those who may not know, Dustin has a background in administration. So he used to be a vice principal, right, Dustin?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, and I'm a senior teacher. Yeah. So from our diverse backgrounds, we wanted to support teachers to help them meet the expectations of teaching and education.
And it's just been such an incredible kind of journey talking about it too, because we come from like very different systems of education in the United States versus Singapore. And as we have found also in the UK and in Australia and in Africa and in, we've really
All over the world.
all over the world. And even though we all have differences in the way that our schools are run and that education is run in our different countries and different states, etc., we are also all experiencing a lot of the same struggles, whether that's teacher shortages, teacher burnout, trying to wrestle with AI and what that means, what it's meant to teach in a world after a pandemic and how that has shifted education drastically from where we originally were, right? Like no matter where you're at in the world, these are all things that are impacting teachers.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and this, frankly, this journey has taught me so much, Dustin. Firstly, it reminded me that storytelling is at the heart of great education leadership, right? Every time we sit down with a guest, we're not just sharing strategies or techniques, we're sharing the human experience of being an educator, whether it's in the classroom or the principal's office. We're talking about the moments that make us question everything, the breakthroughs that remind us why we chose this path, and also even the failures that teach us the most important lessons about what we do in the classroom.
Yeah. I mean, and just getting the chance to collaborate with such a wide variety of people and start to build friendships with people and community with people that you previously would have never been able to do that with. And I think, so I'm with you. Like, it's been a huge learning experience, just not only in like executing, recording and delivering and editing a podcast, or trying to get people to come on the podcast. But
that was a
also
struggle in the beginning. But now we have
all
a
along the
queue
way.
of people waiting.
I mean, we're lifelong learners, right? And like, that's what this is all about.
Yes, and I love it that I could speak with you to find out the how leadership thinks, or how it works for them, because maybe what surprised me most was about how this podcast has strengthened the bridge between classroom and administration. Having these conversations with you and our guests has helped me understand the challenges you face as a leader, the balance you have to make of supporting teachers while meeting accountability measures, the weight of making decisions that affect entire school communities. That's not easy. And I hope our partnership has shown listeners that when teachers and administrators truly collaborate, you can grow the school, and things can happen and things can move.
Yeah. And I think from my perspective, things that you've taught me has been a lot more in the realm of tech and AI, places where I've not always been super comfortable or, I've not always been a super tech savvy kind of guy, but and we're both English teachers, so that's already crazy, but just coming at it from completely different angles. And so, you bringing in that world of tech and AI usage has really helped to develop me, not only in my teaching practice, but just in my everyday life. And so I super appreciate that we have that kind of balance where not only are we learning things from our guests and teaching things to other people, but we are learning things from one another as well. And I think that's the beautiful thing of learning and education.
Yeah, and I think we've gotten great feedback as well from listeners, and people who have listened to our podcast. The teachers and administrators reaching out to say that they've felt that they are now less alone. That we've given them new perspectives to old problems, and also reminded them that we're all on the same team. So I think that's important. This sense of camaraderie among teachers, among educators, that's something that we need to cultivate, especially now with we have a lot of stories of teachers leaving the profession. Yeah, so what we need to do now is even more strongly to strengthen our connections with each other. Yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree.
So when we look at podcasting, right, in terms of what we're doing is podcasting, in what ways can podcasts be used as academic texts, and why do you think that matters?
Yeah, I mean, I think something that we need to think about, or that teachers should be thinking about, is when you hear that word text, we often think about the written word. But in reality, texts come in all sorts of forms, right? Texts can be the written word, they can be novels, they can be dramas, they can be poetry, they can be nonfiction. But text is also video, text is also audio. And so whether that's instructional videos, whether that's recording speeches, whether that's listening to speeches or listening to podcasts, these are also forms of texts. And so it doesn't always have to be that we're making students write or read, but also to listen and to speak, because that's all part of, human nature and the learning process. And so I've used podcasts simply like where I've used like the tool Brisk, for example, where I've taken an article.
Yeah.
Hey, I want to simplify this. I want to give this to students in a different way. We read enough as it is. That's not like going anywhere, but how can I deliver this article in a different way? And so using a tool like Brisk, I could highlight the entire text and be like, turn this into a podcast. And it'll turn that text into, a 2-minute, 5-minute long podcast. I can create guided questions that then go right along with that to check for comprehension. And students can then listen to something that they're, learning about instead of reading about it. And I think in today's day and age, that's just hitting students in a much better way, where we're spending a lot of time on our phones, a lot of times on social media, where we're not, and a lot of times not even necessarily watching the things. Like kids are not always logging on to YouTube and watching the videos, or logging on to TikTok and watching the videos, but they will put them on in the background and be listening to things. I think about how often people listen to audiobooks while they're driving, or now listening to podcasts while they're driving. It's just another way of taking in information, and it is still considered, a text. And I think that matters because we all learn in different ways. And so we have to, when we're teaching, we have to use different modalities in order to reach all of our students. Not everyone is going to be, learn as effectively when they're reading something versus when they're watching something or listening to something. And so I think that there's a great area for podcasts, because even a lot of podcasts like this one are recorded video as a video. And so, yes, you can listen to it on an audio device. You can listen to it on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, but you could also watch it on YouTube. And that's a completely different, a different way of taking it in, you know? So I'm curious, what do you think about, using podcasts like in the classroom and using them as text?
Well, I think that's a great idea because podcasts are getting, is getting better and better in terms of, the affordances of technology behind this. Because I'm not sure if you have used Notebook LM before, and Notebook LM actually allows the person listening to the podcast to join in the podcast and become a podcaster. So it's very interactive in that sense. Yeah, and it's amazing with what AI is doing at this moment. So I think that is definitely something that is very beneficial in the classroom as a new medium, because you don't usually hear students creating the podcast. Maybe
Mhm.
listening to it, yes, but creation of the podcast not so much. Anyway, from where I come from, so I think it is that process of creation is very important because it involves multimodality. You need to be able to communicate well. You need to be able to write a script. You need to be able to do research. So I think it's perfect for student engagement and learning.
I mean, that actually, going away from saying that, podcasts shouldn't and don't need to be and shouldn't necessarily just be something that kids listen to as far as interacting, but, even being able to record their own. I mean, I'm even working with a student right now where we were, the assignment that we have was to write about like a environmental issue that you're passionate about. And instead of writing about it, she's going to create a video. She wanted to do like a TikTok type video to do it. I have another student who's working on a project where he needed to take the purpose of a text that we read from a Native American, um, and take that purpose and give it in a different way that's not text based. It's supposed to be quote unquote image based. And he said, hey, can we record a podcast in order to have this conversation? And I was like, absolutely we can. I was like, did you know that I actually, he's like, do you know how to do that? And I said, well, yeah. Did you know that I have my own podcast? And he's like, wait, what? You do? So he's like, so you could quote unquote be the host and I could be the guest, and that's how we could, do this project. I said, absolutely. Right. And so that kind of leads me into asking your opinion, because this is much more your world than my world. But how do you think podcasting can actually be used as a meaningful, manageable, project-based learning tool for teachers and students?
Wow, that's a great question. I think that is the new medium that I was mentioning earlier, because podcasting has completely changed how I think about project-based learning in my classroom. When I first started experimenting with student podcasts years ago, I had no idea I was about to discover one of the most powerful learning tools, right? Because let me tell you about the skills that students can develop through podcasting. It's honestly mind-blowing, because like I mentioned previously, the research component. So when my students know they're going to be speaking about a topic on a podcast that real people will hear, right? their their research goes up next level, because they know that, hey, this is real. It's what we call
Mm-hmm.
authentic learning, right? So it's an authentic situation. So they're not just copying or pasting from Wikipedia anymore. They're seeking out primary sources. They're conducting interviews. They're doing surveys. They have to do fact checking across multiple platforms. So I had a student last year who was creating a podcast about climate change in our local area, and she ended up interviewing like so many of her classmates and even people outside of the school. And I think the depth of her research showed that that a lot of work has been put in to come up with this simple podcast. So I think the medium is simple enough that kids can grasp and run with it, and it's something that is shouldn't be underestimated, because that's the research bit. Then there's also the communication, which I think is very powerful,
Mm-hmm.
because in every sense of the word, right, students are literally finding their speaking voice, right, and they're learning how to articulate ideas clearly, how to pace their delivery, how to engage with listeners. But they're also finding their intellectual voice. I think that's very important. Their perspective, their unique way of understanding and explaining complex topics. So I've watched shy students blossom into confident communicators. Okay, and I've seen students who used to struggle with traditional writing excel at verbal storytelling. So
Mm,
it's about finding their strengths and freedom of expression. So I think those two are very powerful things already to do with podcasting and project work. Uh, but I think one of the incredible aspect of it is the collaboration aspect, because students have to work together to plan episodes, coordinate interviews, and then of course they have to work with constructive feedback, often from me, and they become each other's producers, editors, and biggest supporters.
mhm,
So I think it definitely engages the student because of this multiplicity of roles that are involved.
mhm.
Yeah. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I'm also just thinking about not only does it help to develop a ton of skills, because there are a lot of skills. I've had to develop skills in, so there's also public speaking, right? Like, e- even if you're recording it only as an audio, you're still a public speaker at that point. And so, even thinking through not using words like, like, or a lot, that you have to become aware of what you're saying and how you're saying it so that you're not drawing things out a lot. Um, and additionally, it doesn't have to be hard. You don't need fancy gear to do a podcast. Your AirPods are fine. A computer with a microphone is fine. You don't
Handphone
need,
is fine.
gamer headphones will work, right? You don't need to go out and spend hundreds of dollars to record a podcast. It just doesn't have to be that way. And I think that that's the other thing that people get hung up on is like, well, how could I do that? Like, I don't have all the gear that it takes. I don't have the tools that it takes. Like, we do this on a Google Meet and we use a really simple video editing software that, but a lot of people know how to use GarageBand. Or I was thinking, we talked last time about how when we were doing this episode swap with Modern Classrooms, it was their episode was in a different format than what ours are in. And I was trying to figure out how do we convert things so we can edit things, right? And I used Canva. Like, there are so many tools that you can use that are really
Wow.
easy to use, to do this. Um, and additionally, you talked about the collaboration. Like, teachers can work across content areas. So like if you're an English teacher and a social studies teacher, like you can have your students working on a podcast because there are both content and skills that are involved in both of those, areas that you
Yeah.
could work across then classrooms to then collaborate. And so not only does that bring collaboration amongst students, but then it also brings collaboration amongst teachers.
Yeah, definitely. I've that's the best piece of advice I can give is to start with something manageable, maybe a weekly 5-minute segment where students share what they learned that week or
Mhm,
interview each other about their projects. See, I
mhm,
began with book talks. So where students recommended their what they've read to their classmates. It took
mhm.
maybe 10 minutes or less of class time just to record, and suddenly students were having deeper conversations about literature than I've ever heard before. So the project possibilities, cut across many different areas and are endless. But I've seen amazing work in every subject. Science teachers have students create science simplified podcasts, where they talk about things that interest them. Yeah. So then social studies students investigate local history. Yeah. And I think these are definitely something that is that every teacher should explore.
Mhm.
So teachers, you are hesitant about diving into podcasts. All I can say is you just embrace it and dive into it with the same learning curve that your students are facing so that you can learn the technology together. And it's not really a steep learning curve either. So the best part is you get to let them teach you,
Mhm.
instead of you teaching them all the time. So let them troubleshoot technical issues if you face, sometimes our students are even better than us, right?
Yeah.
So
You know,
with that,
that
right, that's
that
the,
actually
yeah,
gives me an idea too, now that you said
yeah,
that. I was just thinking, because you're talking about like book talks. So now I'm thinking back to
Yeah.
when I was teaching novels, and I was trying to teach novels in a different way, right? Like traditionally, you read a novel in school. I'm a high school English teacher, so traditionally you read a novel in school, and it might take you 7, 8, 9 weeks to get through a book. But studies would tell you,
Yeah.
like, that's not how we actually read. Like when you read for pleasure, you don't read a book over the course of 9 weeks usually. Um,
Yeah.
and so I had read this book about teaching students to read based on skills rather than for content, and how to teach students to, or how to work with novels and novel units in a much faster way. And what I used to do with that was, I had students in like book clubs, right? And we would read one book together as a whole class, and then after we got through that book, we would read another one that each book club would choose. And through that process for both books, at the end of every week, we would do a Socratic seminar. And now I'm thinking, you know, instead of doing a Socratic seminar, kids could record a podcast at different checkpoints as they're reading a novel. And then in their little groups, they would have basically a Socratic seminar conversation, but as a podcast, which then would allow you a lot more flexibility of having a lot more, choices of books, for example. You could have groups where it's just a partner. You could have groups that are of 3, 4, 5 kids, and then they could record their little podcast together. And it would, it's the same idea as doing a Socratic seminar or a roundtable discussion or a Harkness circle or whatever you want to call them, right? It's that same kind of idea. And like you just sparked that, like talking about doing book
That's
talk.
awesome. That's awesome. You know what I like about that is that you are focusing on the pedagogy, not on the technology.
Mm-hmm,
So the podcasting works because it gives the students that authentic audience,
mm-hmm,
then the real purpose for their learning and the opportunities to engage with the content in ways that feel relevant to their lives.
mm-hmm,
So I guess that when students really know their podcast might be heard by other people, real people, and this is what makes it something real for them. Yeah.
mm-hmm. Yeah. And you said it yourself. It's the authenticity that comes along with it. Like this is authentic learning and an authentic way of communicating what you've learned.
Yeah, I love the way that it also builds their agency. I've seen their confidence grow because of their ability to engage others through their podcast. So when students hear their own voices, sharing knowledge, asking thoughtful questions, they start to see themselves differently, I guess. They become contributors rather than just passive listeners and absorbers of information, right? So I guess that's the kind of learning that follows students long after they leave our classrooms,
Mm-hmm.
right? So, Dustin, with that, what are we gonna be taking away from season 2, and what's next for Teachers Talking? I think our listeners are like,
Man, this season 2 has been awesome. We have talked about so many different topics. I think some of the things that really stood out to me from this season, um, are episodes that really mean a lot to me, I guess. For one, just a couple episodes ago, Ghazali, you and I talked about balance and sustainability in teaching. That's something that I've really been focused on, personally and in the people that I work with. And so that episode really stands out to me because I think that teachers are struggling more now than ever. Teachers have always struggled with balance, but they've been struggling with balance more now than ever. And so that episode is one that stands out to me because we didn't just talk about like our struggles with teaching. We talked about the ways that we create balance, the ways that we, the struggles we have had, and the ways, that we have created that balance with like really tangible strategies and techniques that teachers can use. And so that's one episode that like really stands out to me. If I was to say, like, if you want to get a good picture for like what Teachers Talkin is about and you haven't listened to any episode before, that's actually the one I think I would point people to. But some other ones that really stand out to me from this season include talking about human values with Javier and talking about how important it is for us to be teaching human values in conjunction with our content. I also really enjoyed talking to Bobby Canosa Carr about his book. It's called Can I Go to the Bathroom and Other Asinine Questions We Ask in School. Absolutely incredible book. And it was a great conversation because we were really talking about how we challenge, power and structure within schools to make changes. Because there are just so many things happening in schools that shouldn't be happening, that don't need to be happening, that don't happen in any other, world and in any other job force, in any other work setting. And the last one I think that really stands out to me was talking with Robert Barnett, also about his book, but about hybrid learning and self-paced mastery-based learning. Because again, we know that traditional teaching just isn't working anymore with most students, but also teachers only know what teachers know, and they're not getting exposed necessarily to all of the best types of PD and models and strategies for teaching. So that's just another episode that really stood out to me because we're just talking about a shift in how traditional teaching can move so that we can reach more students, differentiate easier, and really build more independence and ownership with students. So those were kind of the ones that really stood out to me. How about you? I already know one of the ones you're going to say. You're going to say you really liked the episode with Joe where we talked about AI. Yeah.
Of course, yeah. Joe Dale's episode about AI, yeah, that stood out because he got me interested in certain other tools that I've not looked at. Yeah, so Joe is one, and of course the other one was Chelsea Marone, because that's another AI one. We've got a few AI ones, So what I like about Chelsea's one is about how you use AI to help with teachers' productivity, burnout. To do things to allow teachers to do more of the interesting things that they sign up for when they became teachers, rather than the admin work and the things that really bog you down with the teaching. Yeah, so that one was really an eye opener. Of course, I can't forget. Let me see, the one on data by Tom Castor, the founder of DataFight Classroom, right? Because I'm English. I'm not math trained, so numbers. I'm afraid of numbers. So Tom got me looking at numbers in a less of a fearful way, and to think of it as data to instruct us to find out the best approach to teaching our students, to close that gap. Because without data, you'll be groping in the dark. Most of the time, you're just guessing. Yeah, so data is important. Yeah, and of course, I like Connie Rasmussen's episode because that is a huge change for me, because AI is a lot of classroom work that we do. So for Connie's one, where we look at bringing the classroom outdoors, that's a real eye opener for me. Yeah, so I got to try out more of that, to just bring the kids out of the classroom and do things outside. Yeah, so that they don't just think of school as being an indoor activity kind of thing. Yeah, so those are some of the few that stood out for me in season 2.
Yeah, and I think, man, we touched on so many other topics too. We've talked about parent communication. We've talked about why it's important for students to take notes and outline. We've talked about growth mindsets, right? Like the list seems to go on and on.
Yeah, don't forget the Fajar's one on 21st century skills. Yeah, important
that feels so far away. Talking to Faja, oh my goodness, wow, that feels so long ago. But yeah, you're right. That was just season 2. Goodness gracious.
Yeah.
So tell me, what are you looking forward to? We covered so much in this season. So what are you looking forward to covering in season 3 when we come back in the fall?
I'm waiting for more to be engaged with more topics, more interesting topics. Of course, more AI. If we can squeeze in more AI, I'll be glad to dive into more AI topics, because it's something that's close and dear to my heart. So I really love to have more AI conversations, and the way that AI is growing so fast these days, is there are more and more new advances in technology. Yeah, so those things are what perks my interest. So I would love to discuss more about that. What about you?
I'm looking forward to talking more about reading strategies for one. That's not something that we have had a chance to talk much about over the first 2 seasons. So I think that I'm really looking forward to talking about that. Getting into more about like gamification in education. I think that kind of goes along with like your thoughts
Yes.
around like AI. I think
I would
I'm
love to
definitely,
know more about gamification. Yeah.
yeah. And I know I've really dipped my toes into some gamification over the course of this year. So yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to that. And I think even getting into more about some social emotional learning, because there's just always so much that can be talked about when we talk about social emotional learning, and also just talking more about teacher employment and retention, sustainability, balance. Like I said, that's just been a big topic for me as of late, and I think it's just so incredibly important that I think that the more we talk about that, the better, because the more tips and strategies we can get from
Yeah,
people on like what's working for
we
them,
have to.
the more we can help other people continue to find joy in this profession, because it's such a joyful profession when things are going well, and when they're not, it can be horrible, and I get that.
Yeah.
But for me, in 19 years, I love education and I love teaching, and so and yes, it's hard, but I find so much more joy than I do distress. But I know that's not the same for everybody. So I think being able to find, time to talk more about that, I think is also going to be great throughout that next season.
Yeah, I agree with you. What I can say is we will have more great topics coming your way. Yeah.
So as we close this up, Ghazali, and close up season 2, I'm going to ask you one final question. And that is, after 2 seasons of recording this podcast together, what would you say you are the most proud of?
Wow, what am I most proud of? I'm most proud of lasting this long and keeping it going. Dropping the episodes every 2 weeks. And it's not easy. I must tell our listeners it's not easy because to do this recording, I have to stay up to like sometimes up to midnight, and Dustin has to wake up early 7 or 8 a.m. on days where he doesn't have to go to work. Yeah, so it's a bit of a sacrifice for us, but I think it's worth it. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
So that's what I'm
I
most proud of.
I actually would echo that exact thought. Like, I am just proud that here we are on episode 35, that we've already recorded episodes for season 3. And we have more that we're going to be recording in the coming weeks, which I think is really exciting. I'm proud of our shift over the course of time into really trying to focus more on storytelling and experiences and less just on strategies. But also with you, very, very proud of like keeping this going, because it is hard. We are 13, sometimes 14-hour differences because we like to change the
Yeah,
times
man.
around. So and that leaves us with like very minimal days and times in which we can record together, being that we're so far apart. So like we can't record just any day of the week, because that doesn't work. It wouldn't make sense for you to be recording at 10 and 11 o'clock at night on a school night, and just like it just is what it is. So that's definitely been the biggest challenge, but also like I love every moment of it. I love every moment of being able to have these conversations and meet with you, whether that's on a late Friday night or an early Saturday morning. Like, it just always ends up bringing me a lot of joy. So I am just really proud of
Same
like
here.
what we are and what we've put out so far. So, well, listeners, here we go. We are closing up season 2. We want to just thank you for joining us in all of these conversations. Whether you have been with us since the very beginning or whether you have just found the show, we greatly appreciate you being part of this Teachers Talkin community. Ghazali, I greatly thank you for all of your insight and partnership and collaboration throughout these last 2 years. And I am also extremely, extremely thankful to all of the educators who have come on this podcast to share their voices and their experiences and their stories. It means just the absolute world to both of us. I know I can speak for Ghazali in that. So
Definitely.
if you have enjoyed this season or even just this episode of Teachers Talkin, please be sure to subscribe, to review, to share the podcast with your educator network. Season 3 will be on the way this coming fall in September. And we simply cannot wait to keep learning and growing with you. So if you are interested in being a guest on the podcast, we are recording throughout the summer. And we will continue recording, into next year. So if you are interested in coming on and talking about education, you do not need to be an expert in anything, just passionate about education and have something that you want to talk about and stories that you want to share. You can click the link in the show notes and sign up to be a guest. And we would absolutely love to have you on. But here we go. Let's close this out. Thank you so much for tuning in to Teachers Talkin in season 2. And we will talk to you after the summer. Bye, everybody.